It's my absolute honor and privilege to welcome you all to the keynote session of the third International Conference of NPPA. My name is Sargam Bhatnagar, and I have the pleasure of being the moderator of this session. It is my great honor to introduce the keynote speaker for the session, Dr. Michael Steger. Dr. Michael Steger is a professor of psychology and the founding director of the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University. He also holds honorary positions at the University of Melbourne, the Stockholm School of Economics, and Northwest University in South Africa. His research focuses on how people flourish through building meaning and purpose in their lives and in their work. His recent work focuses on aligning human well-being interests with the well-being of natural and societal life-sustaining systems. He has published more than 150 scholarly articles and book chapters, and his published work, including the two most widely used measures of meaning and meaningful work, the Meaning in Life Questionnaire and the Work and Meaning Inventory. He has published three co-edited books, including the Wiley Blackwell Handbook of Psychology of Positivity and Strength-Based Approaches at Work and Purpose and Meaning in the Workplace. He is currently writing the forthcoming book, The Presence of Meaning, with Oxford University Press. He provides keynotes, lectures, workshops, and consulting around the world on the topics of meaning, purpose, psychological strengths, positive education, meaningful work, and creating a happy workplace. On behalf of Team NPPA, I welcome you, sir. I will now introduce our esteemed chair for the session, Dr. Shalini Duggal. Dr. Shalini Duggal brings with her more than 2 decades of work experience in the areas of behavioral assessment, learning and development, and organizational development. Her background spans diverse sectors, including IT services, digital imaging, education, consulting and advisory, and insurance. She holds a PhD in psychology from IIT Delhi, specializing in cultural psychology and positive psychology. She is currently working with Accenture in the Global Responsible Assessment team. Prior to this, she was working with BirlaSoft, a CK Birla company leading leadership and behavioral skill development for the global organization. We are pleased to have you here, ma'am.
Thanks so much, Sargam. Thank you for that very warm welcome and introduction. All right.
I will now go ahead and hand over the session to Dr. Shalini. Over to you.
Thanks, Sargam. So it's an honor for me to be here to be a part of the third International Conference on Positive Psychology by NPPA with the theme of cultural perspectives on positive psychology. Professor Steger could not join us today, but he has been very kind to share his keynote on regenerative positive psychology with us. Regenerative positive psychology is a proposed fourth wave of positive psychology that shifts the focus from solely individual well being to encompass the well being of broader systems, including the environment, social structures, to ensure sustainable flourishing for all. It's an emerging field that focuses on a holistic approach with a focus on systems and sustainability. Let's move on to Professor Steger's keynote on this topic, and let's listen to his insights on the same. I'll request Sargam to please play the talk now.
Sure,
I'll request the audience to please bear with us. This is taking a couple of minutes.
Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for inviting me to give you this presentation today. I am Michael Steger. I'm a professor of psychology at Colorado State University. I'm also the founder and director of the Center for Meaning and Purpose. I've done meaning and purpose research for 20 years now, and my new interest is in trying to popularize systems approaches and or what some people call third wave approaches to positive psychology and well-being science. In this talk, I hope to present my version of this, which builds on the research of other folks as well, and the calls to action of folks like Tim Lomas, Marie Vissing, and Peggy Kern. So we face lots of challenges in the world, and currently we're still operating quite a lot within a quite individualistic and even capitalistic approach to positive psychology and happiness. We are leaving behind so much wisdom and knowledge, as well as we're not doing so well at developing a science of positive psychology and well-being that can actually meet the realities that we're facing with our polycrisis experience everywhere around the world. So regenerative positive psychology is a call to action to reorient positive psychology and well-being science to better meet those challenges, but also to better embrace perspectives from around the world. This is the paper. You can get this. It's open source, so if you want to read more, you can download this paper for free. This is from the Journal of Positive Psychology. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is positive psychology and has it been successful. And I will push that to say that one of the implicit contracts that we make when we study positive psychology is that through our work, focusing on happiness and well-being, we will make the world a better place. I will test that hypothesis with some data. I'll point out where I think positive psychology can grow and analyze positive psychology from a sustainability perspective. Are we an industrial approach as usual? Are we sustainable as a profession, or are we potentially regenerative? I'll define regenerative positive psychology and the three pillars, and I'll offer some ideas about what this might look like. So the psychological history of positive psychology begins with lots of conversations and lots of research and even major theories from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. But in 1998, Martin Seligman really launched the positive psychology movement with an address to the American Psychological Association. And positive psychology was one of two areas that the call was made to focus on in psychology. One was ethnic conflicts. I think no one would think that we've done very well on that count. But the other was positive psychology. Maybe we can try to think about whether we've done better in positive psychology than we have in helping the world solve ethnic conflicts. Also in that address, though, there's this stark warning. Standing alone on the pinnacle of economic and political leadership, the United States can continue to increase its material wealth while ignoring the human needs of our people and of the people on the rest of the planet. Such a course is likely to lead to increasing selfishness, alienation between the more and less fortunate, and eventually to chaos and despair. I think you could argue that we have indeed, in the United States, continued to focus only or primarily on material wealth, We've ignored the human needs of our people and the people around the rest of the planet. And of course, we've ignored the needs of the planet. And indeed, when we look around the world right now, we see shocking levels of selfishness. We see alienation and loneliness. We see huge divides between those who have a lot of resources and those who do not. And I think in many parts of the world, it feels like there's quite a lot of chaos and despair. So at the same time as calling us to positive psychology, Seligman also kind of warned us about this trap of only focusing on our material wealth. And I would say that that trap actually applies also to our well-being wealth. If we only focus on increasing our own personal well-being wealth, which is one of the things actually that positive psychology led us to start concentrating on, I think we lead to these same outcomes. So is positive psychology a success? This is pretty quick to answer in a lot of ways. There are huge numbers of articles coming out every year. They're being cited by other researchers. There are dedicated journals and many, many books. We have famous speakers who are making tons of money when they go to talk about positive psychology. We have conferences such as this one. There's terminal degrees like masters in applied positive psychology, even PhDs. There are not that many public policy initiatives. In fact, I'm not sure there are as many public policy initiatives now as there were 10 years ago. But there are some, so that's some measure of success. But why do we support, as a society, people investigating personal happiness, which is what positive psychology mainly does? I believe that the reason that society thinks it's okay to invest in this is because we keep telling them things like, happy people are nicer people. Happy people work harder. Happy people are better for each other, right? So that implies that the reason we study happiness and that we invest in making people happy and have well-being is that it benefits all of us. And I think we need to look at some charts to see if we actually think this is coming true. So I'm going to ask this question, is the world a better place? And I'm going to ask it in degrees of difficulty. So, first of all, are people happier? That is exactly what positive psychology tries to do with its 20 years that it's been around. So did it at least do that? We can also think about sources of happiness. These are mainly societal sources and societal supports for happiness and well-being. And finally, we can ask, is all of this happiness delivering in any kind of way to a better world? So this is the easiest question we can ask. Do people have higher life satisfaction? You can see some of the countries around the planet have gotten a little bit happier. Some have not. For example, India is not quite as happy as it used to be. China and Russia are happier. The United States and Canada are less happy, and so on. So it's hard to say exactly whether the world is happier based on this. And I had an AI image creator help me develop an emoji for this, and this is the emoji. It could be that according to life satisfaction, we're a little bit happier, or more people around the world are happier, but it could also be that we're not quite as happy, so this is hard to determine. However, if we simply ask people, are you happier, instead of are you satisfied with your life, then we do see some gains here. I think overall, with this way of measuring happiness, we can say, yes, the world is a little bit happier than it was something like 20 years ago. Now, for all of these graphs, I went to our World in Data, which is a free and amazing source, and I started as close as I could to 1998, when positive psychology was first proposed by Seligman at the American Psychological Association Annual Convention, and as close to today's date, 2024, as I could. The data are not everywhere. I tried to use every metric that had bearing, that was represented in at least a lot of the world. There's not that many that are represented in all or most of the world, but I wanted a good representation across all of the continents that are populated, and as close to those dates as possible. So on this slide, you can see I got 1998. That's good. I have data on every continent. That's good, but the most recent measurement of happiness was way back in 2014. So we're not really sure if anything changed, but already the trend looks pretty good. I guess we could have gotten a lot less happy in the last 10 years, but I'm going to give this one to positive psychology because, as you'll see, we need some good news when it comes to looking at these types of charts. I'll provide you a summary as we go and then a final summary of the analyses that I did. So we're probably somewhat happier. The happiness is a little bit higher. Depressive disorder rates seem to be lower. Suicide rates around the world are falling. And depending on how you view alcohol use, alcohol consumption could indicate happiness if it's used at social gatherings, for example. However, at the same time, alcohol consumption, generally speaking, is seen as a problematic behavior linked to stress and despair, so it probably needs to go in that the world is a little worse category. Life satisfaction could be either way, but if you just count up a general guess based on population of countries where life satisfaction is lower versus higher, it looks like probably life satisfaction around the world is a little bit lower than it was 20 years ago, and anxiety is higher. So depending on how you measure it, but if the one thing that positive psychology is able to do is make people feel happier, we're, doing kind of a good job, I guess. What if we take a look at the sources of happiness? And that would be the things that social indicators research, quality of life researchers, social scientists have shown support happier societies. It's, again, a mixed bag. We've seen that gender equality is becoming improved around the world. Globally speaking, the middle class has grown while the lowest income segment of the global population has shrunk. So we see something quite different in the US, where the most wealthy people have gotten more wealthy, and that those gains have mostly come from the middle class in the United States. So in the USA, the global socioeconomic gains are going in the wrong direction. Across the entire globe, they're mostly going in the right direction right now, as is malnourishment. However, democracy, free elections, and trust are all falling around the world, for the most part, on the balance. So, generally speaking, democracy, free elections, trust in your neighbors, and wealth gaps are key indicators of happiness. And we're seeing a lot of those fall. However, we're seeing some really good global gains around malnourishment, the global middle class, and gender equality. Now, is the world getting better? The answer is no to pretty much everything. Every indicator of the world, which would be the health of the planet in this case, is getting worse. Here we see carbon emissions increasing from fossil fuels year over year. That dip is COVID. That was the only bright spot other than the global financial crisis, which is the other dip. So if we completely collapse the world's economy, we make slight gains in carbon emissions. Is the world getting better? The temperatures keep rising on average. Air pollution deaths are increasing rapidly over the past 20 or so years. So every country below that yellow diagonal has seen increased death rates from air pollution. So there's not many countries outside of Europe where there aren't more people dying every year from air pollution. Forest coverage has, generally speaking, gotten worse, so we're deforesting our planet, either intentionally through logging or raising the land for agriculture, or unintentionally through the knock-on effects of forest fires and wildfires. In North America, they've been surveying bird populations for quite a long time, since 1970 actually. I put an arrow there where 1998 occurs, and you can see that there are just simply fewer birds on this continent of North America. So an estimated 2.9 billion birds fewer alive today than 1970. This is the case everywhere, though. This is the Living Planet Index, and these are all the monitored wildlife species on every continent, and in every case, pretty much over the last 20 years, all species. The number of living animals on the planet, regardless of species, more or less are going down, except for, ironically, in North America, where at least we know birds are decreasing in numbers as well. So generally speaking, if we look around the planet, it's getting much, much worse. There's not a single indicator of the health of the planet that's actually improving right now. Every single one is going in the wrong direction. If we want things like places to live, food to eat, air and water that don't make us sick, we're not doing enough. And I know that positive psychology didn't sign up to say, hey, we're here to cure the planet. It also didn't say we're here to promote democracy. It also didn't say we're here to promote equality or education or any of the other things that make life better for all of us. But I think we ought to say that as a discipline that focuses on well-being, we should take the well-being of everyone and all of the life-sustaining systems around us into account. Otherwise, what is the point? If we live in a planet that can't sustain life, what does happiness even look like at that point, right? So to sum up, it doesn't look great. We seem to have made some improvements. Child malnutrition is missing from this table. I'm sorry about that. So there have been improvements in happiness, depression, suicide rates, possibly life satisfaction, gender inequality, and malnutrition. However, generally speaking, trust in other people has gone down. It's gone up in some countries where that's been really good, and it's gone down in some countries where it's looking really bad. Wealth disparities globally look pretty good. In the US, they're going in the wrong direction rapidly. Anxiety, alcohol use disorders, the loss of democracy, fewer democratic elections, and everything that measures the health of the planet are going in the wrong direction. And the reason I think this is important is because what we're really doing with positive psychology and well-being science is we're running really fast forward. This is actually a still from a video. You can find videos like this online. This is an American baseball player running really quickly to catch a hit. This person is running roughly 30 kilometers an hour, and if this person isn't looking ahead of himself, he will obviously run into the wall. What I think well-being science is doing is looking backwards at the beginnings of this field where we looked at individual well-being, individual flourishing, and individual happiness. And as we keep looking back at whether can we make one person at a time feel better, we're missing the warning signs on the horizon. This is actually part of a movie still from Mad Max Fury Road. Right? So Mad Max, there's a world without water in these movies, and that makes everyone look pretty terrible. And a good life in Mad Max world is much, much worse than even a medium life in today's world. So we need to look forward so that we can run towards solutions that affect the problems that we're actually moving towards as societies and as a species, in my opinion. And I want to say that context is very, very important. One of these countries right now is the happiest country on earth. The other country is being invaded and has been bombed. They both share a border with the same country, in this case Russia. Finland has been voted the happiest country on earth a few times, but you can't imagine that Ukraine is the happiest country on earth. This is the country where the context changed rapidly, right? A power invaded. It, in a sense, took away the peaceful environment in which happiness can thrive and replaced it with a violent, scary environment. Meanwhile, Finland has wonderful quality of life, good institutions, lots of peace, very safe. And I just would challenge you to do the thought experiment, right? If more of the world turns and looks more like Ukraine in the future than it does like Finland, do we have right now in our hands positive psychology interventions and theories that are powerful enough to keep everyone happy as the conditions of life continue to get worse? You can probably guess by this talk that I think we do not have powerful enough interventions. I do not think that we're studying the right thing necessarily, and I certainly do not think that we're promoting the correct perspective on well-being if all we're doing is promoting individual well-being. So here are my views on the critical flaws of positive psychology and how I believe it needs to change. There is just a mono focus on individual well-being. This has been noted several times. And here's a great list of papers that have said we need to consider systems, collectives, and a new wave of positive psychology. You can see Tim Lomas has published 2 papers on this topic with teams. Peggy Kern from the University of Melbourne has published one paper on this topic, and Maria Vissing from South Africa, Northwest University in South Africa, has published 2 brilliant papers on this as well. I would say Vissing 2022 is just an incredibly inspiring paper for me personally. Have been published reviews that have done a review of what has positive psychology looked at. When I go to that big review by Stuart Donaldson, I see that 80% of those papers focus purely on individual level outcomes. Now, in my own analysis, I looked at the top 50 most cited articles in the Journal of Positive Psychology, and I found that 96% of the most cited papers were solely focused on individual level variables. And that's whether that variable is thematic, such as gratitude as an individual benefit, whether it's causal, that is something individual level causes something else, or the outcome that they're studying. So this says that only 4% of the top 50 most cited papers in the Journal of Positive Psychology even make any kind of nod at all to a thematic perspective on systems level or collective level, or they think that their independent variable or the dependent variable is related to these things. So this is just astonishing. And if we believe that 80% of all the published articles on positive psychology are about individual level outcomes, but 96% of the ones that we cite the most are, then it means that as a field, we are attracted to papers that focus on individual level well-being. And I think that is very, very strange, because if you look across the planet and if you look across human history, individualism is rare. It's not the norm for how people live, and it's not the norm for how people think of themselves. And yet this seems to be the most persuasive argument around how a person should live their lives, focused on their own well-being. Everything else is treated as an infinitely renewable well-being input, right? So I think this is, I'll give you some examples, but I think this is very, very shocking when you take a moment to think about this. We say that happiness comes from democracy, let's say, right? Ruth Wienhoven has shown this. Good governance and stable democratic governments tend to produce well-being at higher rates than other forms of government. But what is positive psychology doing to protect democracy? Really nothing. So it's just this resource out there, democracy, and we just hope it keeps giving us well-being, even though we're ignoring the fact that there are threats to democracy. And if democracy is good at achieving well-being for more people, and achieving well-being for more people is what our field is about, why aren't we paying attention to democracy? I would say, and of course in my case, I'm arguing that we should also be paying attention to the health of the planet, since we know that nature, for example, is a source of well-being. We do very little to protect nature in positive psychology, right? So this is the critical flaw. We're focusing on what is in it for me, as if we have no responsibility to the things that make our lives better. So for example, if we analyze positive psychology as an industry, we find that it is an as usual assumption. It's a resource extraction industry, right? Whatever resources are necessary to increase individual well-being, they are just assumed to be infinite, that in fact they're even low cost. So we know that good positive relationships are critical for well-being. We tend to study the effects of positive relationships on well-being much more than we try to help people learn skills to develop positive relationships, right? So theoretically, once we've run out of positive relationships, we'll move on to the next thing. Maybe that will be nature. Maybe that will be forgiveness. Maybe that will be democracy. Whatever it is, we keep thinking that there's going to be an infinite supply of well-being raw resources out there that we can keep using to build happiness for ourselves. When any of those sources are depleted, positive psychology tends to move on, right? The hot topics within positive psychology change all the time. We don't tend to nurture those resources. We just tend to think, what's the benefit to me? And you can see this in 3 of these examples. And these 3 things, all 3 of these variables, gratitude, awe, and nature connectedness, are by their nature self-transcendent. Their benefit derives from something outside of ourselves. In gratitude, we have to be grateful for something that's outside of ourselves. In awe, this experience where we encounter something that just changes our perspective on the world around us and makes us pause and go, wow. Well, that's always something that's outside of ourselves. And of course, nature connectedness, which is kind of a trending topic, says that we need to connect to nature, but it doesn't really, we can't really have nature within ourselves. So all three of these things require something outside of ourselves to derive this well-being benefit. And there are very few studies where we're trying to say that gratitude also comes with a responsibility to cultivate good people in our lives and help them out too. Reciprocity. We hardly ever say that awe, and the number one way that we study awe is by exposing people to beautiful nature. Almost none of those studies. There's one or two, I think, where they show that awe increases people's caretaking of other people and of nature. And even in the nature connectedness field, we are much more likely to hear someone say, go out and enjoy nature, go out and connect with nature, go out and bathe, do forest bathing. And very, very little about nature-connected research is designed to remind us that nature is fragile, and if we lose it, there's going to be nothing to connect to. So this is business as usual within positive psychology. It's pulling resources into itself. I actually think it's a little bit more dangerous than that as well, because we tend to see in positive psychology quite a lot of consumerism. We see people launching programs and special retreats, and we see there's even a luxury market in positive psychology where the big names charge more money, and people will pay more money to hear positive psychology information from someone famous than they'll pay to hear from the people who did the research that put words in the mouth of the famous person in the first place, right? That has all the hallmarks of consumerism, and consumerism is a resource-intensive endeavor. So I worry that positive psychology is becoming highly individualistic, but also very, very consumeristic. And in a consumeristic model, you don't care about investing in the externalities around you. You pass the cost off to someone else. And I worry that that's what we're doing in contemporary positive psychology. We don't have to have it this way though, right? We can reorient it. We can reorient positive psychology and well-being science. We have not corrected for the failings of how human beings live. And this is straining all of the sources of well-being around us. But there's also a philosophical foundation in positive psychology that points towards moderation, such as in eudaimonia research that says, we want to achieve a happy medium, the golden mean in ancient Greek philosophy. If we had broader philosophical roots, we'd find quite a lot of support in Taoism, for example, about finding moderation. And then, of course, I'd like to point out the Finland versus Ukraine problem. As the context gets worse, do we know enough about how to protect people from the consequences of war, famine, flooding, fires, lack of food, mass migration in order to find food and water for your children? I mean, we have a lot of catastrophes that could happen. And I don't see positive psychology modeling those accurately for their potential impacts on well-being. We could talk about sustainability, but it's far too late. And here I really do shift hard into environmental models, right? So we're over-consuming the earth. We consume, about 1.75 times what the earth can replenish in a given year. So it's too late to be sustainable because we are depleting what the world has that keeps life going. It's not every individual completely. There are certainly very, very wealthy individuals who over-deplete the planet, but we're all more or less in the same boat. We can hope that other people will stop depleting the planet, or we can be part of us stopping depleting the planet and then still hope that other people stop depleting the planet. There's no point in just waiting for other people to change their behavior if we know that one behavior is better than another behavior. Also, we're constantly told that there's been nothing like the global uplift we've seen over the last 100 years of capitalism. People are healthier. There's fewer people living in poverty. And my read on this is that we have done that by charging future generations quite a lot of debt. What are they going to do when there's no longer water that we can have on access when we want it? What are they going to do when basic necessities like food suddenly cost enormous amounts because we've depleted the soil and so on, right? So we are over extracting resources from the planet, which means at some point we'll reach a tipping point and we won't have the resources to sustain the life that we have. And the people who are alive at that point are going to pay for the debt that we are living in right now. So we're really pushing down future generations, many more billions. However many billions we've been able to lift out of poverty by exploiting the Earth's resources, exploiting human resources around the world, more billions are going to have to pay that debt with much worse lifestyles, at least according to projections. So this isn't very exciting, this isn't very happy, this isn't positive. I will try to redeem it by a new vision of the future, because there are approaches that we could bring into well-being science and positive psychology. These are regenerative approaches. And here the goal isn't to increase the health of a particular organism like a human being. It's to increase the health and growth-generating capacity of life-sustaining systems and resources. If we can build those, then the organisms like human beings that live within those systems will flourish. So here's a statement of this in the field of agriculture. A regenerative system provides for the continuous replacement through its own functional processes of the energy and materials used in its operation. So we turn this into a positive psychology statement. We say regenerative positive psychology ought to continuously replace, through the practice of positive psychology and the pursuit of well-being, all of what it takes to create well-being in the first place in the systems around us. Safety, fairness, a good environment, those sorts of things. Now, regenerative processes do not offset things, right? If you've heard of carbon offsets for your flights, that's not how it works. It's not we do a bunch of damage in one place and then we do something nice in another place. We don't spray pesticides on plants that go into the water and then buy a water filter. We are using the system in a way where our use itself makes the system more healthy. So I think this is actually a really powerful positive psychology idea, that the way that we live as we're trying to build our own health and well-being builds health and well-being for those around us, the people, the organisms, the life-sustaining systems that we all need. So we ought to be trying to understand and make more visible well-being and positive psychology interventions and ideas where if you pursue them, it makes the world around you a little bit better. If we compare this to industrial agriculture essentially creates factories where everything is treated uniformly. So the goal of industrial agriculture is the health and well-being of one particular crop and it just obliterates the considerations for the world around it. It assumes that it can just keep adding more resources to a plot of land to keep getting food out of it. But there's a lot of different approaches to this. I mean, there's a lot of damage done to our world by traditional agriculture. And if we move towards regenerative agriculture, we could start undoing those horrible effects. And so I'm hoping that a regenerative positive psychology could help undo not necessarily the damage that positive psychology per se does, but just that the human quest for individual elevation does. So here's just some examples of regenerative positive psychology or regenerative agriculture. Regenerative practices, we just carefully think through, what do we need to operate this system? What is the goal of the system to develop well-being? How does the use of that system, such as developing human well-being, how does that contribute in turn to all of the elements that our initial inputs need in order to be healthy? So in a farm, We need air, we need nutrients, we need clean water, we need sun. So as the farm operates, any waste products or things that could be damaging to that system need to be um, they need to be managed in a way that actually, as crops grow, as animals feed, they're finding a way to replenish and heal other parts of the system so that overall the system keeps getting healthier as it's used, right? You don't have to truck in pesticides from someplace or fertilizer from someplace else. And I think it's a really great metaphor for positive psychology. Why can't we have a version of well-being where we know that huge gaps and huge stressors around money make it hard for people to be happy? So we should be helping people understand well-being in a way where their engagement with the world helps reduce huge wealth gaps. It helps distribute resources to those who need them most. That's just one example. In my case here, I would say, why can't we have a positive psychology that recognizes that it's a lot easier to be happy in a city where you have water and air and things aren't on fire, right? Where we have nature that cleans the air and the water for us, as opposed to destroying nature, polluting the water, and then throwing chemicals and filters at it. So we can think of well-being as stretching to include, like, I can imagine my well-being stretching, including each one of you, as well as the forests around me and the animals that pollinate plants and all those sorts of things. It's certainly, I think, a more hopeful vision than just trying to be happier and happier and happier as the world gets worse and worse and worse off. So this is the argument I would make about regenerative positive psychology. We should seek to nurture proximal, like very, very close by, local, within arm's reach, and distal systems that are healthy for each other as well as the individuals within them. For example, in the regenerative positive psychology approach, it really would matter to me how daily life is going in India or other parts of the world. Are people happy? Are institutions strong? Are people getting opportunities? Are they living in an environment that's healthy? That experience of well-being ought to be somewhat relevant to me because we live in the same system, the global system. So I ought to be thinking, is my approach to well-being, are the ways that I talk about well-being, happiness, in my case, I've done a lot of research on meaning in life, is the way that I'm proposing meaning in life operates large enough and robust enough to include how my understanding of meaning in life is affected by well-being in India or elsewhere around the world. So it'd be great if other well-being and health sciences reoriented the same way, where we paid attention to the fact that we cannot generate health or well-being on our own. We all need inputs from the systems around us. And if all we do is take those inputs, eventually those inputs are going to run out. So the basic unit of analysis in regenerative positive psychology is not the individual scores on well-being measures. We should instead shift to perceptions of, and ideally factually documentable, but these aren't my fields, so I don't really know how that goes. But we should shift to perceptions of health, growth, and the flourishing of life and happiness sustaining systems around the world. That should be well-being. If those well-being systems, if those happiness and life-sustaining systems are healthy and growing, then we have well-being, right? And if on an individual level it's not quite working, then we can focus a little bit more attention on that, as opposed to focusing almost 100% on individual well-being and not even caring what happens to the health of the systems. And, to try to make this recognizable to people who've studied positive psychology a lot. And, I don't know how much any one of you have dived into positive psychology. If you have, that's great. If not, that's even better because you're new to this topic here. And thank you for listening to what this field potentially has to offer. But it initially began with 3 pillars. Marty Seligman suggested, and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi suggested there should be 3 pillars of positive psychology. I think there should then be 3 pillars of regenerative positive psychology. So the first one is to expand the definition of well-being, as I mentioned. The second is to build a science of well-being systems instead of individual well-being. And the third is to generate knowledge of positive human caretaking. Right? So how do we build knowledge about how to help people take active part in building the health of life and happiness-giving systems around us. And I'll jump into each one of these a little bit deeper as we go. So the first pillar, regenerative positive psychology, seeks to understand and foster well-being that includes not only individuals in human context, but all living systems and systems that sustain life. So right now, we're kind of hoping that we tell people positive psychology is about your flourishing, and we say, well, you don't have to be selfish about that. In fact, you should, there's a lot in here that says you should actually try to be a nice person. That's as far as we go, but I think that should be reversed, right? I think we should start off with the basic understanding of happiness is that you're doing good for your others and even beyond humanity. Then we can talk about selfishness if we want to, and then we can see how well you're flourishing. So it's really flipping the arrow from person to the environment or the world around them. Instead, it goes from the world around us into the person. The second pillar, we would encourage and inspire the production of research, interventions, educational programs, and organizational approaches that explicitly address the social, political, and environmental systems that sustain a good life both for people and the planet. And hopefully this would be a flexible enough system that it could apply to the systems that you care about most. I see the most pressing need in environmental systems, but other people see the most pressing need in other systems. There's no reason that we have to say there's only one system we're going to focus on. I really use environmental systems as an example here. But we need to develop basic assessment and how we catalog those systems from a well-being perspective. We need to have intentional multidisciplinary partnerships with experts who know those systems. Those could be scientists, policy experts. They could be the people who are out there doing things, fixing up social institutions that are falling apart, fixing up landscapes and environments that are falling apart. And we really need to listen to indigenous communities all around the world, folks who have deep local knowledge about how things actually work, where they're at. And we need to do this very quickly because the way that things work ecologically and environmentally around the world are changing. And it would be just the worst possible outcome if we lost the connection between the deep knowledge that indigenous communities have about how systems work where they're at. If we lost that because the system stopped working in a predictable manner for them. So we're running out of time to get some of this information. And, part of the issue here also is that we prioritize certain types of knowledge. We prioritize research that's done at big universities and that's published in big journals, and we don't quite listen to deep knowledge where communities over many, many generations have learned how to operate in ways that sustain the well-being of their communities until the outside world comes and messes everything up. The second pillar also says that we should look to build interventions that can preserve the health of those systems, and we can look at work organizations, families, societal or environmental health organizations as well. We should be trying to build those to be robust because they have direct implications for our own well-being. The third pillar says we should prioritize the development of research, education, and interventions to encourage and cultivate whatever it is in us that makes us positive caretakers and benefactors of each other, as well as the systems that support well-being around the world. And so this is really incorporating a regenerative perspective into the science and the practice that we do. So right now, we just basically are focusing on one person at a time, maybe a classroom at a time, maybe an organization at a time. We can shift that to do quality science about how are people who are enacting well-being actually doing good for the systems that they rely on. I think we can break the ideological gridlock sometimes that sometimes gets in the way. It's not a value necessarily, people will say, for basic science to help or make a difference. People out there just want to get their data and they don't care if it does any good in the world. We can just say, like, well, that's fine, you keep doing that, but we need to understand how this applies to the global crises. We're not saying it's a value thing that everyone needs to vote or everyone needs to, treat each other nicely. We're saying that this is the way in which well-being occurs, and we're all in positive psychology in some way trying to understand better how well-being occurs. So it's well within our scope of practice. So again, these are just the 3 pillars again, and it's really just trying to be a call to action. How do we change how we view well-being? How do we build a science of well-being at a systems level? And then how do we generate knowledge where well-being looks a lot more like each of us doing a better job of making those systems around us more healthy? So I'm going to close with some examples and next steps. I'm going to hit on these 6 topics. So in positive psychology, we have a massive scope of what we study. We study everything from the biological and lifestyle factors that activate or don't activate specific genes in our DNA, all the way up to global happiness, like some of those graphs and maps that I showed you. So we have huge scope. We already can connect genes to global happiness. So why can't we connect a definition of well-being that insists upon global health to the systems that sustain it? We have a lot of expertise in biological basis of well-being, and we can either just keep measuring biomarkers of flourishing, such as left brain asymmetry, or we can use those research skills to understand system level health. What are the biomarkers of our specific response to systems level health changes? Right? So in some cases, we might see stress or inflammation markers based on harm to our systems. Or we might see upregulation in oxytocin, for example, if we see those systems being helped, or we get to be the ones who are helping in the first place. We can operate on the individual level. We do a lot of this. We research, we coach, we consult, we intervene on one person or one team or one organization. We can just sort of flip this around, right? We can explicitly incorporate these life-sustaining systems into everything that we do so that we start building data, whether that data comes from the practical help that we offer to the world around us through positive psychology practice, or those data come from research studies that we do. Profession-wide level, this is a lot about collaboration and opening the doors of how we view the importance of knowledge. We need to understand that Indigenous knowledge is really, really vital right now, and we need to make use of it, particularly where that Indigenous knowledge is so deep with it, which is in the systems where it's developed. There's no match to what a community who's lived in a place for multiple generations knows about how that place operates. You can't just do a global survey and understand that. We should reach out to the people who understand systems as well, chemical engineers, ecologists, law experts, and we need to cooperate with folks who make big differences in the world, NGOs, venture capitalists, and so on. At a conceptual level, we just need to try harder, I think, right? So in my meaning in life research, I have been asking for 20 years about whether individual people's life is meaning. We really ought to tackle collective meaning. Right? So how do groups create shared meaning, and how do people experience that and then contribute back to it? Right now, the only collective meanings that we seem really good at creating are ones that make us hostile to each other. We need to change that. And we need to embrace systems level as the norm. Whenever we have a job to do, we should at least raise it, right? We should at least say, like, I need you to follow up on this. We need to talk about the systems level. We can't just keep putting more responsibility on individual workers, for example. So I want to leave you with a couple takeaways, and I'm going to give you some counterfactuals as we go. So we've begun to explore well-being in science and practice, but the foundations of well-being are being destroyed in too many places and in too many ways. And so we don't have too many choices in front of us anymore. We can close our eyes and pretend it's no big deal. This is this is probably one of the most common reactions I see is people will focus on how they feel right in the moment, and they'll ignore some of the threats so they can feel better. I do this myself. We can say it's someone else's job, right? It was in this meme, it was someone else's job to remove that animal. The person who's doing the lines just did their thing, right? This is like staying in your lane. It's not currently positive psychology's job to save humanity, but why not? We can wish and wait for a miracle to come, right? Some billionaires, some billionaire out there is going to start a company that's going to be really nice. Well, I think we got to keep waiting. We can believe that we have big enough interventions, right? And that all makes sense, right? This is from the movie Jaws. These people go out to hunt this shark that's attacked people. Of course, now we love sharks a lot, so we wouldn't do this. But they go out and they think that this boat is going to be fine to haul in the shark. And obviously, when they get there, they see the size of the problem they're facing. They realize they're going to need a bigger boat. We're going to need a bigger science of positive psychology and bigger interventions. Or we can try to solve the problem now, which is what I'm hoping you'll do. And we can do this as a team. So this is my final takeaway. In positive psychology, we find dreamers and realists, right? We find people who go out there and think a lot. We find people who go out there and do a lot. We bring together researchers and practitioners. We get people who focus on the tiny details and those who focus on the big picture in every combination in between. So we already have a lot of hope, a lot of skill, a lot of flexibility, a lot of diversity. We just need to keep building on that. We can work together towards both individual and system-wide levers of global uplift simultaneously. We can and we should, and it has to be together because that's the kind of way that we survive as a species. Thank you so much for your time. I wish I could be there with you, and good luck.
All right, great. So it was wonderful to hear Professor Steger talk in so much detail about the evolution of positive psychology leading up to regenerative positive psychology. While positive psychology so far through what is normally called the first three waves has focused on happiness or well-being, leading to incorporating challenges and complexities in studying or understanding well-being, broadening the scope to include culture, context, spirituality, etc., to now this emerging field or this emerging wave that takes into account so much more of the larger contributing aspects that have a bearing on well-being. So Professor Steger really talks about the objective of positive psychology, which has so far been to make people happier and make the world a better place. He poses three critical questions to help us understand how well that is happening. So he asks, are people happier? There's some evidence around that. He asks what are sources of happiness really increasing, and that's a mixed bag. Finally, he asks, is the world a better place? And there's actually a decreasing trend towards that, and which he kind of exemplifies through increasing carbon emissions, temperatures globally rising, air pollution deaths which are increasing. There's a decline in bird population, forest cover, wildlife species, number of animals, etc. Right. He also talks about the strength of context, and how he brings this to light is by talking about two countries, Finland and Ukraine, who share a common border with the same nation, but they have such different levels of happiness. Using all of this, he draws into light that there's too much focus or monocular focus on individual well-being and not enough focus on systems that help us achieve that. And by systems, he uses a few examples of governance, such as democracy, health of the planet, using nature, etc. He says that resources like gratitude, awe, etc., which are traditionally part of the field of positive psychology review and study, they're treated as infinite and renewable, while this is not really the case, right? There's not enough importance given to the larger system that leads to these outcomes, and why and how these have to be nurtured. For example, nature, which he talks about at great length. He also says there's an increasing trend on too much consumerism and individualism in positive psychology, and how sustaining systems like nature are actually getting depleted. Using this context, he turns the discussion to look at the larger context and the systems that contribute to well-being through regenerative positive psychology. He says there's a need to generate capacity of life-sustaining systems and resources, and for regenerative systems like fairness, health, safety, environment, etc., that lead to well-being. We need to target the system that contribute to well-being for all and make the world a better place. He uses the example of industrial agriculture versus regenerative agriculture, and he draws a parallel between a focus on individual well-being and a focus on regenerative or the system level focus on well-being. He says everything is connected and there's a need to shift our focus towards perspectives of health, growth, and flourishing of life and happiness sustaining systems. He also talks about 3 pillars of regenerative positive psychology, which essentially include expanding the definitions of well-being to include systems and building a science of well-being systems through knowledge building, research, interventions, and organizational approaches. There's a need to flip the arrow from the person to the world around us while looking at well-being. Finally, he concludes his talk by examples and next steps, including biological, individual, conceptual, and system level being the norm of studying well-being. I hope these insights and perspectives given by Professor Steger helped you learn more about this emerging field. I'm thankful to him for sharing this insightful address with us. He couldn't be with us today. However, if you have any questions, you can send them to us and we will redirect them to Professor Steger. There's also a paper he cited which will give you more insight into what he spoke about today. It's a free source article. You can look it up on the internet and you can find it in the Journal of Positive Psychology. With that, I thank you all for listening in to this talk, and I hand it back to Sargam now.
Thank you, Shalini ma'am. As we conclude, I extend my sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Professor Michael Steger, for an insightful session, and to our session chair, Dr. Shalini, for the leadership. Thank you to all the attendees for your participation. Next, we have some exciting presentations, so we hope that you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.